My name is Gerald, and this is our first example of removing people using Photoshop. So without wasting any time, let's begin. Now in this particular picture, we want to remove this lady putting on a white skirt and leave the lady putting on a yellow trouser. So what do we do first? Let's start by duplicating our main background by pressing Ctrl plus J on the keyboard. Then grab a selection tool of your choice. In this case, I'll be using the pen tool. Then make a selection around the subject that you want to remove. So while making your selection, leave a few pixels away from the edges of the subject, just the way I'm doing. Now when you're done making the selection, right click and then click on make selection. Choose feather radius of 0 and click OK. Now our first attempt to remove the subject will be by the use of the content aware fill. So click on edit and then click on content aware fill. Now on this window, to zoom out, you can press Ctrl and the minus key on the keyboard. And if you want to zoom in, you can press Ctrl and the plus key on the keyboard. So as you can see, we are using auto sampling and the result looks terrible. So let's help Photoshop by showing it areas that it shouldn't sample from. So go ahead and grab the subtract brush. And we don't want Photoshop to sample from these areas. So let's subtract them from the sampling. Now, if you look at the preview, this is a lot better compared to the first one. By the way, if you want to understand more about the content aware fill, there is a video I made explaining everything from scratch. So check it out, the link is in the description. So at this point, we can work with this result. It will be easy to fine tune it later. So let's go ahead and click OK. Now let's go ahead and press Ctrl plus D on the keyboard to remove this selection and zoom in to look at the imperfect areas that need fixing. So we can see this area of the background needs a lot of fixing, and also this area of the hips need fixing. So now, what tool comes to your mind when you see this kind of challenge? Personally, I recommend the Liquify tool. We can use it to change the shape of this area. Then later, we can also use the pen tool to define more of the shape, and finally use the clone stamp to fix these areas of the background. Now, before using the Liquify tool, let's first merge these two layers. Hold the Shift key, then click on the second layer. Right click, then click on Merge Layers. Also, it is advisable to turn your layer into a smart object so that whatever changes you make is non-destructive. So again, right click on that layer, then click Convert to Smart Object. Now let's launch our Liquify tool by clicking on Filter, then select Liquify. Now in this window, you can also zoom in using Ctrl plus and zoom out using Ctrl minus, or you can hold the Alt key on the keyboard and use the mouse wheel to zoom in or out. Now before we start making any changes, there are areas that we don't want to affect. So we shall use the freeze mask tool to freeze the areas that we don't want to be affected. So I don't want these areas to be affected with whatever adjustments we are going to make. Then after freezing these areas, go ahead and pick the forward warp tool. You can adjust the size of the brush using the square brackets on the keyboard. So under properties, I'm using pressure of 50 and density of 50. So what we shall do is start nudging these areas to form the shape. Just do it slowly. You don't give her very big hips. It has to be identical to the other side. You can't have big hips on one side and small hips on the other side. It would look terrible. And by the way, if you also want to understand more about the Liquify tool, there's an entire video I made explaining everything. So be sure to check out that video. The link is also in the description. So for now, let's go ahead and press OK. In case we have any changes to make, we can always come back to this very point because we are using a smart object. So go ahead, click OK. So now this is the before and this is the after. It's not so perfect, and that is where our pen tool comes in. Now when you look at the edges of the cloth, it looks like it was chopped by a scissor. So we are going to use the pen tool to create an illusion of the cloth folding. So grab your pen tool and start making a selection on the edges, just the way I'm doing. So we shall go ahead and use the pen tool to also fix these shapes. Something like this. And also when you take a look at the background, it needs fixing. So we are going to expand our selection to the areas that we think need fixing. It's this area that is not looking nice. So now after making the selection, right click, then click on make selection. This time we are going to use feather radius of 0.2 because we no longer want sharp edges. So go ahead and click OK. Now for our final fix, we shall be using the clone stamp. So go ahead and grab your clone stamp and then create a new layer. And don't forget to sample from all layers. Make sure all layers is selected. So the clone stamp simply allows you to sample pixels from any part of the image and paste them in another part of the image. So let's increase the size of the brush by pressing the square bracket key on the keyboard. Then start looking for areas that can match. For example, I think this area can be fixed here. So hold the Alt key on the keyboard, click to sample, and then just draw it like this. Look at other areas, sample, and then draw it in. Now, one thing before we proceed, one thing you should know, there was a lady standing right there where we are fixing. So we actually don't know what is behind there. So what we have to do is just create anything random as long as it looks realistic in the final result. And also one other confusing thing is this selection that we have made. So we can always hide this selection by pressing Ctrl+H. It is not removed, the selection is still there, it's just hidden. So it can help you to focus. So let's go ahead and continue using our clone stamp. I'll sample this area, draw it here. So at this point, you don't even need to rush. You can even go take a shower, go take your dog for a walk, or go to the gym, and later come back and take a close look again and fix the areas that need fixing. Also, let's not forget that this is just our first example of removing people. I'll be bringing more challenging photos so that we get to know all the techniques to approach such kinds of edits. So don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to leave a comment. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.